We welcome in our Wednesday regular, the co-host of the Rain Dregs podcast, and of course TSN NHL insider, Mr. Darren Dreger, here with Sekeres and Price. How you doing, Dregs?
Doing well, guys. You're looking good as always. Working remotely. Very, very, very civil and responsible for what's going on around the world.
Don't we look professional too, like actual microphones and such? Like it's like we almost know what we're doing.
Yeah, you know what? The tip off to me, and there's Tiny the Great Dane, the Rain Dregs mascot in the background. The tip off for me is the headphones. See, I haven't got that far yet. I'm still trying to be with the cool kids in the little earbud family.
Gotcha. Well, we appreciate you making yourself available on video today as well. We'll use a clip or two on our social channels. Let's just start with the Canucks front office, Dregs, because, boy, I think you were ahead of the curve last week when you said, hey, guys, don't go anointing Patrick Allvin just yet as Canucks general manager. He is one of the finalists here, one of the guys in the mix, but it's not necessarily his job. At what point would you start to worry and wonder whether there's a match here? Dregs, it's been several weeks now, I think, with his name out there.
It has been out there, but maybe somewhat prematurely, right, Matt? The association, the history between Jim Rutherford then with the Pittsburgh Penguins and Patrick Allvin now with the Pittsburgh Penguins is an obvious one. And I know in past conversations with Jim Rutherford, even when he left the Pittsburgh Penguins, he spoke very highly of Patrick Allvin and the relationship that he had and the fact that he believed that he could do more in the industry. So I think that others spoke to Rutherford at that time. And then as you're conjuring up the list, both long and short, of what the Vancouver Canucks might be looking for after Jimmy is hired as president of hockey operations, the connection was just too obvious to discount the chances of Patrick Allvin. But I was reminded by those involved in the interviewing process that, Allvin is very likely going to make that short list. And I believe that they're pretty close to being there now, which has 5, maybe 6 candidates on. I can't list them all because I don't want to be wrong in listing them all. But we do know that there are a couple that have been made public. And Matt, you were among the first, if not the first, to suggest Sean Burke. So I will echo that, and Patrick Allvin. But I was told very quickly last week before our show that, look, don't make the mistake of acknowledging Patrick Allvin as the front runner. And that's not discrediting his chances of becoming the general manager of the Vancouver Canucks. They just haven't. They weren't a week ago at a place where they were comfortable in saying that, but there are more interviews this week, and Allvin could be part of that run.
Ryan Johnson is a holdover from Jim Benning's regime, a Canucks executive who has worked in player development and even was given an interim AGM title. Is there any chance that RJ ascends here in a Jim Rutherford organization?
Yeah.
What do you know?
There's a chance, of course. And again, trying not to be dismissive or disrespectful of those who are making that short list. You know, whether Ryan is given full opportunity and is in deep consideration for the GM job, I'm not certain of. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't hold a level of high importance within hockey operations for the Vancouver Canucks. Again, when you look at how the dust settled after Jim Benning and Travis Green were let go and others followed, you know, the fact that Ryan Johnson was kept on board, I think, is credit to the Aquilinis, obviously. Must have a fair level of confidence in his ability. But here's also something that needs to be maybe discussed and investigated a little bit further. Because in a conversation that I had with Francesco Aquilini and a couple of other colleagues at the Board of Governors meetings, you know, he made it clear that he and Jim Rutherford had been in consultation discussion about potential changes well in advance of the hiring of Rutherford as president of hockey operations. But like most, you know, veteran executives, you know, Jimmy wanted the organization to first do the dirty work. If you're making the decision to change your general manager, then do it. And they did that. So I would think that Rutherford probably had a handle of what Ryan was all about and wanted to get to know more about what he was capable of. So again, he could be in the mix, but even if he isn't in the mix for GM, that doesn't mean that he's not going to be an important piece moving forward.
We'll talk about Montreal in a little bit here, but more just the concept of somebody laying in the weeds. Ken Hughes seemed to be a late riser there. I know that if you knew another name, you'd probably throw it out there right now. But based on what you know of Jim Rutherford, would he be susceptible to somebody coming late into the campaign? Or do you think he's got his mindset? Is he more fastidious about his group now that he's got?
I would think that he's at a place in the process where he's got a group. And whether he's got to whittle down that short list or 5 or 6 names, I'm not entirely sure. But he's on board with having and hiring an entry-level general manager. And ownership is fully on board with that. And, man, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you mentioned Ken Hughes, Blake. Nobody is asking a ton of questions about the validity of Ken Hughes outside of some with cultural concerns. I mean, he's essentially raised in Montreal. He's fluent French speaking, all of that. But he doesn't have experience in being an NHL general manager. But Jeff Gorton has that in abundance, no different than Jim Rutherford in Vancouver. So I think that that's why it makes it more acceptable, more palatable for all involved to think outside the box, as the Montreal Canadiens did. But you know what? Ken Hughes was there all along. And I'm not suggesting here that Jeff Gorton just, went through a process just to justify the process by talking to Danny Briere or Roberto Luongo or Matt Darsh for the Tampa Bay Lightning. He legitimately had interest in those individuals and others as well. But he had Ken Hughes in his sightlines right out of the gate. And the minute he was hired as the overseer of hockey operations for the Montreal Canadiens. So I think he needed to go through it. And Ken Hughes needed time through the holidays, et cetera, to digest the possibility, whether or not he was willing to move away from his job as a primary agent in the National Hockey League, and whether or not they could make a deal that financially made sense for Ken Hughes. And obviously they were able to do that earlier this week.
If Jim Rutherford's open to entry level, and I'm just workshopping this, I don't think there's a scoop to be had here, but give us your thoughts here. Do you think there's a chance the Sedin twins have entered the conversation to have a little bit more of an active role? They are very visible. And, sometimes you get these, big name special advisor, kind of roles, as that first step for players in the executive level. And you don't really see them. They're not involved. Sedins are pretty visible. Like they're putting their heart and soul into this by all accounts. Between Ryan Johnson and the twins, does Rutherford maybe see the solution inside the organization already?
Well, unless something has changed in the last several days and less than a week, I would say no. That's, again, not to say that Daniel and Henrik aren't going to have meaningful positions inside hockey operations, but I don't think either man feels that they're quite ready for the job of general manager of an NHL club. And frankly, they both have young families, and you look around the National Hockey League at all the star players that you can visualize, ascending to management jobs, be it, the president in certain situations. Like Nick Lidstrom was added to the Detroit Red Wings very, very recently. So I think that they're capable. I just don't think that their lifestyle right now is conducive to everything that has to go in it. But Rutherford has a high level of appreciation and respect for the knowledge and the experience that those two world-class players will bring to the voice of hockey operations, but not at the level of GM.
All right, we put out a message to our text message club members today if they had any questions for you, Dreg. So let's run through a few. Yeah, no, some good ones here. Let's run through a few from Sekeres and Price listeners. Big Jeff wants to know, why haven't we heard any progressive names in the search yet? No contract negotiators, lawyers, logistics-related names, and to which Peter adds, we heard lots about female candidates, Botterill, Hefford, Ruggiero early.
Yeah.
But we haven't heard much since. I believe you had a report on that last week on Insider Trading.
Yeah.
But the progressive names and the female candidates, what can you tell us?
Well, to add to that list, I think Jana Hefford was approached by the Vancouver Canucks. I feel like that role is more as an assistant general manager. And, I think if you want to look into the crystal ball of what hockey operations is going to look like, and don't hold me to this in terms of a timeline, because, the initial adding in hockey operations could be different. And maybe Ryan Johnson becomes an AGM. I believe the Vancouver Canucks are going to hire a woman to be an assistant general manager right out of the gate. Now, who that is, don't know. It won't likely be Botterill, it won't likely be Ruggiero, and it won't likely be Jana Hefford. Could it be somebody else? And then what is that role? If I look at those highly talented women, I'm thinking that the role is probably more on the player development side, right? Where you're communicating, where you're dealing with players, you're dealing with prospects, you're being helpful with your scouting staff and looking at the draft and all that. Conversely, you've got individuals who hold down the position of assistant general manager in hockey operations around the National Hockey League, whose primary function is CBA, it's salary cap, it's negotiating contracts, it's doing that sort of work. I don't think those women really want to get involved on that side of it. Maybe. So moving forward, if you're Jim Rutherford and the Vancouver Canucks, maybe you hire a business person or a lawyer, someone with some CBA and some cap-related hands-on experience to do that side of it initially. And then in the not-too-distant future, you add another AGM who could be a woman, or you add other aspects of hockey operations who could be one of those talented women that we've already talked about.
From Bill in Brookswood, Darren, what do you believe the big picture is for the Canucks with this new management? Get in the playoffs at any cost, aim for the playoffs, but expect next year to be the playoff participant, or reduce the cap, build up draft choices, and start kind of fresh next season? Where on that scale do you think the Canucks are?
I'd like to pinpoint one, but it feels like it might be basically all of the above with the exception of getting into the playoffs at all costs. I don't think that Rutherford has any interest in doing that. He wants to do right by the Vancouver Canucks. Is he likely going to make some trades? I mean, Captain Obvious here, but that's what Jimmy does. But I think it'll be more based on the interest of adding some young pieces, maybe shedding a little bit of payroll, but by no means diminishing the competitive aspect of what the Vancouver Canucks are going to be for the remainder of this season, and certainly building towards a better future for next season. When we speculated on Jaro Halak potentially being in play, and you guys talked about it at length and rightly wondered, well, how much of it could be bonus related, given the carryover, how it's going to impact the cap of the Vancouver Canucks next season. That was a consideration at the time when that information first surfaced, but it wasn't primary. It was more about, well, what could Halak bring back by way of draft pick and prospects? And if the package is right, of course you consider it, but you also high value the player, knowing that Thatcher Demko, as well as he's playing, is going to carry the shoulder of the load, and he's going to be one of the principal reasons why you're nibbling at a playoff spot or you qualify for the postseason this year. So it's a more longer-term approach, but Jimmy's not getting any younger either, right? So he's still, he's hungry. He's won the Stanley Cup now, 3 times, 2 in Pittsburgh, 1 with the Carolina Hurricanes. Very, very decorated, but he is hungry and he's got his eye on the big prize. And it's not going to be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. So there is a timeline for sure.
I know our friend Mr. Dollywall's been poking around this file with Tyler Motte because he's a UFA to be.
Yeah.
So is there an extension or is there a deal here? He's on a decent ticket at $1.2 million. He's a penalty-killing, low-maintenance forward. And, of course, he played so well in the bubble a couple of years ago. Jordan wants to know what would be a return expected on a Tyler Motte. It's basically an early trade deadline rental question here.
Yeah,
I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you too if that scratches the itch for Rutherford. Does a Motte deal, is that big enough for Jim Rutherford or for what he's used to? Does it need to be bigger than that?
I feel like it needs to be bigger than that. But again, Jimmy's not giving pieces away here, and whatever he does is going to strengthen the Vancouver Canucks both on the short term and on the long term. But Motte is his type of player. There's nothing flashy about him. You guys have just described the type of individual player that he is. So I think that there'll be a conversation with the agent first. Find out what the expectation is. Find out what his view is. If he's one of those players, and we say this all the time about pending unrestricted free agents. I mean, not many times over your career, illustrious or otherwise, do you have an opportunity where you can sample the market. You've earned that right to test the market. So if that's what he feels, and he feels that his compensation needs to be much higher, well, that could be a short conversation with Jim Rutherford between Motte's agent and Rutherford or the new general manager, where you say, look, sorry, here's where we have his price point. We'd like to consider, we'd like to engage, we'd like to have him back because he can be a helpful player, but we're slotting all of these guys. So you need to find that out first. And then what would the return be? I mean, it's all supply and demand. There would be a market, of course, for Motte because of all the reasons that we know of. It's got to be a draft pick, right? How high of a pick? That depends on what the market is. When they open the gate on pending unrestricted free agent defensemen, and there's a glut of them if you look around the NHL, and there's some that have some pretty juicy names too, right? And first-round draft picks last year seemed to be the currency for defensemen like David Savard. So what's it going to be this year? You don't know until you get there and until a team ponies up first. And when they do, sometimes that establishes the market.
We have a listener, Leaf in Vancouver, who moonlights as a comedian, Darren. Okay. So he wants to know, has Darren ever asked Ray why he's so pissy?
No, but I will. Episode 18 of the Ray and Drake podcast.
Exactly. That's on a T, isn't it?
Definitely. Definitely.
What did you make of that? What did you make of that exchange? I'm sure you know Jim Matheson a little bit, and you know the frustration that's in that room. To me, there's fault. I think 100%. Jim could have been a little classier with that question, and I think Draisaitl could handle it better.
Agreed.
And frankly, guys, these things happen when you're on Zoom, right? You don't have a chance to hash things.
Well, he was in person. I think Matty was in person.
Was this in person?
Yeah, he was there. Well, he was in the room. Now, the rest of us saw it via Zoom or however it was produced after the fact by the Edmonton Oilers and those in-house. I didn't like it from either account, but again, there's some context that needs to be observed here. Ryan Rishaug wasn't there. Normally he's there and he's, peppering questions. Mark Spector wasn't there. He had a day off. He's normally peppering questions. So the assembled media of those who normally kind of lead the pack weren't there. So it was Jim Matheson, and there were other media types. I'm not going to diminish their role.
But not the veterans.
Yeah. But look, because that was the first thing when I listened to the whole exchange. I went, well, geez, how many questions does each individual reporter get at these media availabilities? Because Matty asked like 4 or 5 before the frustration just kind of boiled over. But it was because they had a shortened gaggle of media assembled there. A smaller version of. But still, I mean, Matty's been around the game a lot longer than any of us. I've got nothing but the utmost respect. I feel like if he had a do-over, he would phrase that question differently. Maybe he'd try and get to the point of where this contempt is coming from, because after the fact, there were some that reached out to me who said, look, Leon is very protective of his teammates. He's a decent leader. He did not like the approach that Jim Matheson took directed at Mikko Koskinen earlier in the year. And the belief is internally that was why Leon lashed out in the fashion that he did yesterday. But look, if a player disrespects me or us the way that I felt Leon Draisaitl disrespected Jim Matheson, I'm not so sure I handle it that well either. I don't know that I say, why are you so pissy? But I probably come back with something a little biting as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, we will certainly be looking forward to the next episode of Ray and Dregs, given the question that we know is coming. Thank you for this, my friend. Have a wonderful week, and we'll catch up next Wednesday.
All right. And look, who knows, but I'm getting the sense that we should have some news on the GM front by the next time we speak.
Yeah, I hope so.
Thanks, Darren.
Great.
Okay, guys, be well.
We got that news sooner rather than later. Darren Dreger, everybody, of the Ray and Dregs podcast. Of course, also a TSN Hockey Insider.